The document arrived at 0600 station time, stamped with the trilateral seal of the Vetri Occupational Safety Council, a body that, until this morning, Station Commander Delegate Presson had believed existed purely for bureaucratic theater. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time, because the second reading hadn't made it less absurd. Formal notice of observed endangerment, filed on behalf of Witness Collective. Ring Corridor 7, Juno Cara Station. Subject: one human biological unit, designation unknown, observed performing sustained locomotive activity in gravity simulation chamber 4, currently calibrated to 5.2 standard gravitational units. Duration of activity, 41 minutes. Physiological distress indicators: elevated facial coloration, visible moisture secretion, audible respiratory irregularity. Recommendation: immediate psychological evaluation and removal from high-risk environments. Secondary recommendation: welfare check, possible neurological impairment. Presson set the document down on her membrane desk, where it slowly sank 2 centimeters into the soft material before she pulled it back. She was Vetri. Her species had evolved on a low-gravity moon with thin atmosphere and soft terrain. Their bones were hollow, their muscles long and lean, their circulatory system a gentle 3-chambered arrangement that prioritized efficiency over force. The average Vetri could sprint for about 11 seconds before their cardiac shunts required a full rest cycle. 41 minutes in 5.2 gravity was an endurance. It was, by every Vetri physiological model, a slow method of execution. She pulled up the security feed. The human was still in there, still jogging. The human's name, she discovered after cross-referencing the station manifest, was Carla Doss. Rank: Environmental Systems Specialist, 3rd posting. Age: 34 standard years. Assignment: routine maintenance rotation on Juno Cara, 40-day contract. Her file photo showed a woman with a square jaw, dark brown skin, close-cropped hair, and a kind of expression that suggested she'd heard every question you were about to ask and had already decided whether it was worth answering. Presson noted something else in the file. Something small. Under personal medical history, there was a single line: chronic situational anxiety disorder, managed, cleared for all postings. She stared at that line longer than she expected to. Then she called her junior delegate, a young Vetri named HFY, who was enthusiastic in a way that only people who hadn't yet been disappointed by the universe could be. "Go find the human," she said. "Politely, don't mention the complaint. Just bring her here. Should I tell her why?" Presson looked at the feet again. Carla Doss had slowed to a walk now, hands on her hips, head tilted back, breathing through her nose in long, deliberate pulls. She didn't look distressed. She looked like someone finishing a sentence. "No," Presson said. "I want to understand before I explain." Carla had been expecting this, not the formal meeting, specifically, but something. The stairs in the corridor had been building for 3 days. Those long, lateral Vetri stairs where their wide-set amber eyes tracked you from a distance, never meeting your gaze directly, which she'd learned was actually a sign of intense attention rather than avoidance. On Earth, people looked away when they were uncomfortable. Vetri looked harder. She'd tried to be unobtrusive. She really had. But Juno Cara had exactly 1 gym with 1 gravity sim chamber, and Carla needed the gravity. Not for fitness. Not exactly. She needed it the way some people needed cold water or loud music or the particular exhaustion of carrying something heavy for a long time. She needed it because when the pressure was external and physical and real, her brain finally stopped generating its own. That was the thing nobody put in pamphlets about anxiety. It wasn't always fear of something specific. Sometimes it was just noise, static, a low-grade hum of wrongness with no source and no off switch. And Carla had discovered at age 19, during a training exercise that had gone twice as long as planned under twice the expected load, that her brain had a manual override. It just required sufficient physical input to trigger it. Her therapist had called it somatic regulation. Carla called it the only thing that works. She showered, changed, and followed HFY through the soft-lit corridors of the station's administrative ring. The young Vetri walked slightly ahead of her, their membrane-thin ears flickering at irregular intervals. A nervous habit, she'd read. Vettri's ears moved involuntarily when they were processing something emotionally complex. His ears were basically vibrating. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. "Commander Delegate Presson simply wishes to speak with you," Sawal said carefully. "Right." She fell into step beside him. "So yes." Presson's office was built for a Vettri body. Low ceiling, cushioned floor that gave slightly underfoot, ambient lighting in the amber spectrum that Vettri eyes preferred. Carla was 11 centimeters too tall for the room to feel comfortable. She stood near the entrance, which she suspected Presson noticed, because the commander immediately gestured to a raised platform near the far wall that functioned as a perch for visiting non-Vettri. Small consideration. Noted. "Specialist Doss," Presson said. Her translated voice came through the room's communication membrane smooth and measured. "I'm going to be direct with you, because I've read your file, and I suspect you prefer directness." "I do," Carla said. "You've been using gravity chamber 4 at 5.2 standard units for extended periods. Alone." She paused. "My colleagues filed a safety complaint. They were frightened for you." Carla absorbed this. "They filed a complaint because they thought I was in danger?" "Yes." "They could have just asked me if I was okay." Presson's ears moved. "That's not how Vettri concern tend to express itself. We document. We route through proper channels. It's how we take things seriously." Another pause, shorter. "I recognize this may seem cold to you." "It seems thorough," Carla said, and meant it. Something shifted in Presson's posture, a slight lowering of the secondary shoulder ridge, which Carla didn't know the meaning of yet, but it looked like relief. "Tell me," the commander said, "why you jog in 5.2 gravity." Carla told her the truth. Not all of it immediately. She started with the practical layer, the physiology, the way high gravity training worked, the load on the cardiovascular system, the bone density, the muscle adaptation. She spoke in systems language because that was a vocabulary she trusted that Presson listened without interrupting, which Carla appreciated. Then she told her the second layer, the anxiety, the noise, the override. The room was quiet when she finished. "You injure yourself," Presson said slowly, "in order to stop your mind from injuring itself." "I don't injure myself. I stress myself. There's a difference. Our medical models don't have that distinction." "I know." Carla looked at her hands. "I've had this conversation on 4 stations and 2 planetary postings. The models never have that distinction. They see elevated cortisol, and they flag distress. They don't account for the fact that some bodies need low to function well." Presson was quiet for a long moment. Her ears were very still now, which Carla would later learn meant deep processing, the Vettri equivalent of someone staring at the ceiling while they thought. "We have a concept," the commander said at last, "called Vessara. It translates poorly. The closest I can render it is the cost that maintains the architecture." She paused. "Every Vettri structure, biological or constructed, has a minimum stress threshold below which it begins to fail. A bridge with no load warps. A bone with no pressure thins. Vessar is a recognition that some things require their burden in order to remain themselves." Carla looked up. "We just never applied it to psychology." Presson continued. "We assumed the mind was different, that the mind should be sheltered." "Most species do," Carla said, "and yours doesn't." Carla thought about it honestly. "Some of us do. Some of us learn the hard way that we don't." There was a second piece Carla hadn't said yet. She said it now, because Presson had offered her something real, and it felt wrong not to return it. "I took this posting specifically," she said. "Juno Careth. I requested it." "I know. I checked." "Did you check why?" Presson's ears moved. "Tell me." "My last posting was a catastrophic seal failure on Meridian 9, 6-person crew. I was the only environmental systems specialist. I held the pressure differential for 4 hours with manual override while the others evacuated." She said it flatly, because flat was the only way she could say it. "I was fine physically. But afterward, the noise got very loud. For a long time." Presson said nothing. Juno Careth has the best gravity sim chamber in this sector, Carla said. That's why I requested it. That's why I'm here. She met the commander's amber eyes. I'm not broken. I'm maintaining the architecture. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. IT was a silence of one person recognizing another. The problem, Presselone explained the next morning, was that the safety complaint had already been routed. IT now existed as an active document in the Vetri Occupational Safety Council's review queue, which meant it required a formal response, which meant Carla Doss was, technically, the subject of an ongoing welfare investigation. Can you close it? Carla asked. Not unilaterally. The witness collective has standing. 7 Vetris signed it. Pressuone's voice was carefully neutral. They were genuinely concerned. I can't erase that without their withdrawal. So I have to talk to them. Or I can file a counter-assessment. No. Carla shook her head. I'll talk to them. They were scared for me. That means they were paying attention. That means they care. She paused. I'd rather talk to people who care than have paperwork argue on my behalf. Presselone looked at her for a moment. Most people prefer the paperwork. Most people haven't read the paperwork. The witness collective met in one of Juno Careth's communal membrane rooms, a circular space with soft walls that absorb sound, designed for Vetri group processing sessions. 7 of them, all station staff. They arranged themselves in the loose crescent that Vetri used for conversations involving emotional weight. Carla sat on a raised platform in the center. She felt like she was being peer-reviewed by very concerned accountants. The eldest of them, a senior maintenance coordinator named Thessalvori, spoke first. We saw you fall, Thessalvori said. Carla blinked. I'm sorry. On the 3rd day, in the chamber, you lost your footing on the incline, and you went to one knee. The old Vetri's ears were trembling, and then you stood up and continued running. We didn't understand why you didn't stop. Oh! Carla had forgotten about that. A bad step on the incline setting, knee down 2 seconds, back up, barely registered. When a Vetri falls in stress conditions, Thessalvori continued, it means the system is failing. It means stop. They looked at her with those wide amber eyes. We thought you couldn't stop. We thought something was preventing you. Nothing was preventing me, Carla said gently. I fell. I got up. That's... She searched for the right words. That's normal. For us. Falls aren't always failures. Sometimes they're just part of the process. The room was very quiet, a younger Vetri in the back, barely an adult by their reckoning. Carla guessed. Raised one thin hand. Does it hurt? The falling. Yes, Carla said. Usually. And you continue anyway. Yes. Why? Carla thought about Meridian 9. About 4 hours of manual pressure override with her hands cramping and her vision graying at the edges, and the noise in her head mercifully, blessedly silent because the external problem was loud enough to drown it. Because stopping would hurt more, she said. Just differently. After the formal part of the meeting dissolved, Thessalvori stayed behind. The others filed out slowly, their ears doing complex movements that Carla was beginning to read as something between resolution and lingering unease. Not hostility, just the discomfort of framework being quietly restructured. Thessalvori sat across from her, and for a long moment said nothing. This, Carla had learned, was not rudeness. It was a Vetri way of indicating that the next thing they said would be the real thing. I have been maintenance coordinator on this station for 19 cycles. Thessalvori said at last. I have worked alongside humans before, for postings over the years. Did you file safety complaints about them too? Carla asked. She kept her voice light. No. Thessalvori's ears moved in a slow rhythm. The others didn't come to the chamber. You are the first human I have seen, truly seen, do what you do. A pause. I watched through the observation glass for 11 minutes before I signed the complaint. I want you to know that. I did not react immediately. I watched. What did you see? Carla asked. Genuinely curious, Thessalvori considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. I saw something that looked like suffering, they said, but moved like purpose. The words landed somewhere in Carla's chest and stayed there. I didn't know those could look different, Thessalvori continued. In our physiological model, they produce the same signals: elevated output, visible strain, respiratory distress. The old Vethri tilted their head. We have no word for chosen suffering. We have words for necessary cost. And we have words for avoidable pain. And we assume all suffering falls into one category or the other. What if it falls into both? Carla said Desavori was quiet for a very long time. Then we have been missing something, they said finally, for a very long time. Carla went back to the chamber that evening. She didn't tell anyone. She set the gravity to 5.2, laced up, and ran. But this time, about 8 minutes in, she noticed something in the observation window above the chamber floor. Desavori was standing there, not filing complaint, not alerting anyone, just watching. When Carla fell on a bad step 20 minutes later, really fell this time, full sprawl, both palms on the floor, she heard a sound through the observation glass. Faint, translated imperfectly by the membrane comm. Desavori had made a sound, not alarm, not distress. Something that the translation matrix rendered after a 3-second delay as, "There, now stand." Carla stood. She ran for another 18 minutes. The Vethri Occupational Safety Council, it turned out, did not close complaints easily, even after all 7 members of the witness collective submitted formal withdrawal notices. The council's administrative structure required a counter-assessment from a recognized medical authority, station physician, third-party review, or, and this was the option Pressa owned, presented with a specific neutrality of someone who had thought about it carefully, a cross-species physiological advisory filing. Which means what? Carla asked. It means, Pressa owned said, that if a representative of the relevant species submits documentation confirming the observed behavior is within species normal parameters, the complaint is formally resolved without a medical review flag on your file. You want me to vouch for myself. I want you to provide documentation that protects your record. Pressa-owned secondary shoulder ridges moved slightly. You have 2 more postings in this sector contracted. A medical review flag would require clearing at each one. Carla rubbed her eyes. What do I need to write? A brief physiological context statement. Standard form. I'll show you the template. The template was 12 pages. Carla stared at it. Vethri documentation culture. Pressa-owned said, not apologetically, I see that. I can help you draft it. Carla looked at her. Why are you helping me? The question came out more direct than she intended, but Pressa-owned didn't flinch. Because, the commander said, the complaint was filed out of genuine concern, and it would be wrong to let genuine concern accidentally harm the person it was trying to protect. She paused. That outcome would bother me. Carla nodded slowly. Also, Pressa-owned added, with what Carla was beginning to recognize as the Vethri version of dry humor, a slight elongation of the final syllable, almost imperceptible. I found your explanation of Vesara to collective more accurate than anything in our own literature. I would like it in the official record. They spent 3 hours on the document. It was, by the end, a genuinely strange thing. Part physiological reference, part philosophical statement, part something that neither of them had a word for. It used the Vethri framework of Vesara and mapped it against human autonomic stress response and voluntary load-bearing behavior. It cited Carla's incident record from Meridian, 9 not as trauma history, but as systems evidence, proof that high-stress physical engagement had produced stable functional outcomes in crisis conditions. It argued, in 12 pages of careful Vethri bureaucratic language, that a human running in high gravity was not a sign of damage. It was a sign of maintenance. When they finished, Pressa-owned read it back in full. Then she said, "This document is going to confuse the council." "Good," Carla said. "They may request a follow-up review." "Even better." Pressa-owned's ears moved in the pattern Carla now associated with something like amusement. "You want them to read it?" "I want someone to think about it," Carla said. "That's all. I don't need them to agree. I just want it to exist in their system and make them ask a question they haven't asked before." "What question?" Carla looked at the document on the membrane desk, slowly settling into its soft surface. "Whether protection and sheltering are the same thing," she said, "because I don't think they are. And I think confusing them causes a lot of damage very quietly." The council's response arrived 6 days later. Pressoone called Carla to her office early in the morning, and Carla could tell before she sat down that something had happened that Pressoone hadn't anticipated. The commander's secondary shoulder ridges were elevated in a way Carla now understood to mean something between surprise and recalibration. The council closed the complaint, Pressoone said. Good. They also forwarded the documentation to the Veterinary Institute for Cross-Species Occupational Medicine. A pause. And to the Joint Station Authority's Wellness Policy Working Group. Carla stared at her. Why? Because, Pressoone said, pulling up the council's response letter, 3 council members have submitted a parallel internal inquiry. They want to know if veterinary occupational wellness protocols have been, their words, systematically miscategorizing stress response as harm for the past 4 decades. The room was quiet. They read the Vesara mapping. Pressoone continued. They applied it to their own research data. Apparently, there's a long-standing puzzle in veterinary occupational health. Certain workers in high cognitive demand roles show better long-term outcomes when they are not removed from stressful environments during recovery. The data has existed for years. Nobody had a framework for it that wasn't embarrassing to publish. Carla absorbed this slowly, because publishing would mean admitting that rest isn't always the answer. Publishing it would mean admitting that their entire wellness philosophy may have overcorrected from historical labor exploitation cases. Pressoone set the letter down. 50 years ago, veterinary workers were pushed past collapse regularly. The reform was sweeping and necessary, but the pendulum went too far, Carla finished, in some applications. Possibly. Pressoone's voice was careful. The council is not saying that. They are asking the question, because of a document about why I jog in high gravity, because of a document that gave them language they didn't have. Pressoone looked at her steadily. Language matters here. We don't act on phenomena we cannot name. Carla sat with that for a long moment. She thought about Meridian 9 again, not the 4 hours this time, the weeks afterward, when 3 different station medical teams had tried to remove her from active duty based on cortisol metrics and response latency scores. All the paperwork, all the careful, concerned, well-intentioned documentation that had looked at her numbers and seen damage instead of process. She hadn't had language either. Then, she'd had instinct and stubbornness and a body that knew what it needed even when every system around her insisted it was wrong. I want to read their inquiry, she said. I'll forward it, and I want to respond to it, if that's allowed. Pressoone's ears moved. You're a third posting environmental systems specialist. You have no standing in an institutional wellness inquiry. I know. I could submit your response as a consulting attachment to my commander's assessment. Another slight elongation on the final syllable. That would give it standing. Would you? I've been thinking about my youngest junior delegate, Pressoone said. Esikoal. He came back from his last deep station rotation with all his metrics in perfect range. Rested, properly recovered by every measure. She paused, and he has been making small errors ever since. Nothing critical, but persistent, the kind that come from a mind that has been too quiet for too long. Carla nodded. I have been worried about him, Pressoone said, and I didn't have a word for what I was worried about. Vesara, Carla said quietly. Vesara, Pressoone agreed. Word moved through the station the way things always moved on small stations, not through announcements or official channels, but through the soft architecture of shared space. People eating near each other. Corridors crossed at the same time 3 days in a row. The particular way veterinary ears moved when a topic had weight. Carla noticed it because she'd lived on small stations long enough to feel the current. People were talking about the document, not the complaint, the document, the counterfiling. The 12 pages that had mapped the human's running habit onto a veterinary philosophical concept and sent 3 council members into an existential inquiry about 50 years of wellness policy. She found Thessalvori in the maintenance bay on the 4th day after the council's response arrived. The old veterinary was calibrating a pressure manifold with the slow, precise movements of someone who had done this specific task thousands of times and had no intention of doing it carelessly just because they knew how. Carla sat nearby, and didn't say anything for a few minutes. Thessalvori didn't look up. "You've been watching," Thessalvori said finally. "The station's been watching," Carla said. "I've been noticing." Thessalvori set down a calibration tool. "The young ones are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About load, about the difference between capacity and fragility." The old Vethri was quiet for a moment. One of the junior environmental technicians, OSSVille, very young, very careful, asked me yesterday whether it was possible to damage a system by protecting it too much. Carla was quiet. "I told him to ask you," Thessalvori said. "What did they say?" "They said they were afraid to, that you might think it was a foolish question." Thessalvori finally looked at her. "I told them that someone who runs in 5.2 gravity until they fall down and then stands up and keeps running is not someone who thinks questions are foolish." Carla looked at the manifold. "What did OSSVille say?" "They said," Thessalvori paused, as if honoring precision of a memory. "They said, but what if I ask the wrong question and she realizes I don't understand?" Carla sat with that for a long moment. "Tell OSSVille," she said finally, "that the only way to understand something is to not understand it first, and that the not understanding is not a failure state. It's the beginning of the architecture." Thessalvori was still for a moment. Then their ears moved in a long, slow wave. "You sound like an old maintenance coordinator," they said. "I'll take that," Carla said. That evening, Thessalvori did something that no one on Juno Carith had apparently done in 11 years. They reserved gravity chamber 4. Not at 5.2, at 1.4, barely above standard. A careful, modest number. But they laced up the station's auxiliary movement shoes, which were 2 sizes too large because they were designed for human feet, and they walked. Not jogged, walked, for 9 minutes. Carla watched through the observation glass and didn't say a word. When Thessalvori came out, their ears were absolutely still, the stillness of deep processing. They walked past Carla without speaking, down the corridor and around the corner toward the maintenance bay. 20 seconds later, Carla heard, through the membrane comm, thin and translated, a sound she didn't have a word for. Not quite laughter. Not quite the sound of something releasing. Something in between. Carla's 40-day contract ended on a Thursday. She packed her kit in the standard 2 hours, cleared her bunk, ran a final systems check on the environmental arrays she'd been maintaining. All nominal, all clean. Good work left behind. She was proud of it the way she was always proud of clean work. Not loudly, just solidly. Pressoon met her at the docking ring. "The inquiry," Carla said. "How is it going?" "Slowly," Pressoon said. "Vethri institutional processes are not designed for rapid change. But moving. The commander's secondary shoulder ridges settled. The working group has requested a formal cross-species consultation framework, first of its kind in this sector. They want human occupational health researchers involved." A pause. "I submitted your name as a potential consulting contact." Carla stared at her. "I'm an environmental systems specialist." "You're someone who understands the distinction between protection and sheltering," Pressoon said. "That appears to be rarer than your occupational classification suggests." Carla didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing which felt right. "HFY has started going to the chamber," Pressoon added. 1.2 gravity. Walking pace. He looks terrible for 10 minutes, and then... She paused. "And then he looks like himself again. I don't fully understand it." "You don't need to understand it," Carla said. "You just need to not file a complaint about it." The elongated final syllable. "I'll restrain myself." At the dock, while the boarding sequence processed, Thessalvori found her. They were carrying something. A small object, flat and hexagonal, made from some kind of compressed station material. The kind of thing maintenance crews made in their off hours, fashioning small things from scrap because the hands needed occupation. They held it out. Carla took it. It was heavy for its size. Deliberately so, she could feel the density of it, the compacted weight. "What is it?" she asked. "A reminder," Thessalvori said, "that some things are built to carry load." Their ears moved in the long, slow wave she'd come to recognize, and that the weight is not a flaw in the design. Carla turned the hexagon over in her hands. On the underside, pressed into material in the careful small marks of Vetheri's script, were 2 words. She couldn't read Vetheri, but she learned 2 words in her 40 days on Juno Carith. She read them slowly, out loud, pronouncing them the way Thessalvori had taught her. Vessara. Yes, Thessalvori said. The ship pulled away from Juno Carith at 1400 station time. Carla sat in the standard crew transit berth, the hexagon on the fold-out surface in front of her, and watched the station shrink through the viewport. It was a small station. Practical design. Nothing remarkable about it from the outside. She thought about O.S. Esvel, who was probably asking a question right now. Thought about Sikawal, walking in 1.2 gravity until he found himself again. Thought about 3 council members staring at 50 years of wellness data through a new frame, asking uncomfortable questions in very long official documents. She thought about Meridian 9, the 4 hours, the silence inside the noise. She thought about falling on the incline in Gravity Chamber 4 and getting up without thinking, because that was just what you did. She picked up the hexagon and held it. It was heavy. That was the point. She put it in her chest pocket, close to her sternum, where she'd feel the weight of it with each breath. Then she opened her next contract assignment on her tablet, read through the environmental system specs for a deep station array 6 sectors out, and got to work. The noise in her head was quiet. For now, that was enough. Yendi,